I've got my PowerPoint fired up. I've got my pink grapefruit LaCroix at my hand, so I think I'm good to go for this particular session. And Cassie and I were talking earlier. This is, we thought it was interesting. This is one session that lots of people have signed up for. We've got a lot of people that filtered through to this one, even more than some of the others we've done. And I'm pretty sure that's because people want to see if any of these fails are ones they have done. Everybody wants to watch this and say, well, I want to see if, make sure I'm not one of the ones doing this. I'll warn you, everybody's done one of these at some point, right? These are things that, as you're using Inventor and as you're going through, you probably have run into. It's interesting. I've been using Inventor since, since Inventor 5.3. Up till then, I used Mechanical Desktop. I started out with Inventor, AutoCAD in the way back days. And as I've gone through, these are things that have stood out to me. So I work with a lot of different customers in a lot of different areas working with Inventor. And these just recur again and again and again. And they're sort of in order. I think this is pretty close. These are some of the things that just really stand in the way. I guarantee there will be one or two that I've missed that you're like, oh, this always happens. But let's just talk through some of these. So I'm just going to jump right into it here. First one is this one, the style library error. Now, if you've been using Inventor for a while, I guarantee you've had at least one opportunity to run into this particular error. If you're pretty new to Inventor, like if you just installed this a couple of weeks ago, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But what happened is Inventor has changed through the years, just the way that they've done certain things. And in the past, what they would do is the style information. So I'll back up. What I'm talking about when I'm talking about styles is we're talking about what dimensions look like when it comes to a drawing. All of this relates to a drawing. Most of it relates to a drawing. What do dimensions look like? What do bubbles look like? What does the parts list look like? All of that information. And traditionally, the way that Inventor did it in the way back days right from the beginning, gosh, probably up through 2012-ish maybe, something like that. Someone might have to remind me when that change went over, if you know. As you would look at that, it would go through and everything up to that point, dimension styles, so on and so forth, was all held within the templates themselves. They're only held in one location within the templates. Then they moved that to the styles library. Well, what happened is as we were going through this, people maybe didn't realize that change had occurred, and it was pretty easy to once that change occurs, to not realize what's going on. So when you do that, and I'll kind of walk through this where we're at, but you'll see exactly what I have on the screen pop up. All of a sudden it says, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't line up, these aren't right. And the problem I have with this is you'll notice there's a big OK button right there. So the first thing everybody does is says, well, okay, and on they go with life. And the next time they open a new template, it says, hey, something's wrong. And they hit it and they go on from life. So like I said, this really goes from older templates. All of the style information used to be embedded in that template. That's where it was kept. Now we want to keep that in the style library. So how do you fix this little fail that comes up? And the solution is to update one or the other. It's really pretty simple to do, to make that update and to make those adjustments. And this is something that I've seen. I'll go out and I'll talk to a customer. I'm like, well, pull up a file, let's take a look. It pops up, style library comes up, and they hit OK. And I always say, hey, has that been going on for a while? They're like, oh, yeah, 3 years. And it's honestly, the solution is so simple that let's just fix it and go on. So I'm going to share my screen here, though, and just kind of talk through this a little bit. Share my screen. There's my screen. There's my Inventor. All right, sounds good. So I'm going to create a new drawing, and if I've done all this right, I should get an error. So I'll say let's create. Oh, there's the error right there. Boom. So I automatically, this is the one that everybody just does this. Okay, cool, and on we go. The error is the template that I'm using. I can't, I've made it through for this drawing, and I can update this drawing, but what we really need to update is the template. So I'll go ahead and update this drawing, and if I take a look at my styles editor, I've got two different things going on. I've got local styles, which are the ones embedded in this template. My precision is a 16th. But if I take a look at my all my styles, it's going to be different. If I can find it here again. Maybe it's one I changed. So what's happening is my dimension information is different from my local template to my other. I'm just going to pull that up again so you can take a look at that information. So when I create that, here's what it's telling me. I'm saying create it from this. It says, hey, the style library definition is going to be used. So it's actually overwriting anything I have in this template. If I had gone through and set this template up with my custom information and set it up a certain way, it doesn't matter. It's pulling the information in the style library. And it even tells me what to do. It says if the style is, the one in the library is correct, update the template. If the definitions in the template should be are correct, you got to remove those styles from the style library. So here's what I really need to do. Because this is deferring. This is just going right to my style library. It's ignoring everything else I have. If I want that to be correct, if I want that to be the one I'm going to use and make those updates, I have to, I'll jump over here. I'll go, excuse me, I want to go to manage. I can update my styles. So basically it's going to go through and synchronize them. Now right now they're using the same things, so I don't have anything to update. If I went to the original template, I could update the original template with the correct information, and then I wouldn't see that issue. So I have to know where that original template is. Right now, mine are stored over here just in the default area. It's just, it's where Inventor puts these templates in by default. So I'm going to go grab my template. There's my test template, which will be in here. I'm going to grab that one. Now it's not in my active project, which I'll say is okay for right now. And now I should be able to go over here and update that one that's giving me the trouble. I'm going to say, yep, let's update it. Yes. We're overwriting it from the style library. Save those changes. So you have to open the template in the location it's at, save it to the location it's at, and now we won't have that error. It just opens right up and does exactly what we would expect it to. It's an easy fix, and it is the most common thing that I see when people are opening a file. And people honestly get muscle memory, and they hit OK so quickly that it just goes away. It means something's broken. Something is wrong. It's a fairly easy fix. We just need to update the templates. So I see some questions are coming in, and we will have time for Q&A at the end, so we'll pull some of that up and talk through some of that. But there's a general idea, yep, style libraries, we've got to update that information. There's a couple of other rules I'll talk about just a little bit later, because I will mention projects again. All right, number 4. So number 5, we had the idea of that, jump back one more, style library error, super common. Then we have the idea of common modeling errors. There's a bunch of them. So I'm just going to kind of talk through a few of these. Even as I was going through it, I'm like, man, you could almost do a webcast just on each one of these and some things we get into and why we shouldn't and where we could do different things. But I'm going to talk through a few of them. One is not using the origin and the origin planes. This is it's super common that we'll see this where it's ignored. And I'll point out a couple of things. I'll draw a quick part and talk through it. Another one, and I'm going to warn you against this, and this is debatable. I would love to have this discussion. There's times when it makes sense. But over there to the right, you notice I've got that super complex sketch. I would recommend that you do not create a sketch that looks like that. This happens a lot of times if you've worked in AutoCAD before because you're just going to draw what that looks like. You're just going to go into AutoCAD and you're going to draw it. And the problem you can run into The problem you can run into is now when I go to extrude that, it's going to be difficult. How am I going to pull up the different pieces and, you know, everything else that we're going to have involved with that? So that idea is I probably wouldn't have sketches that are too complex. My sketches, honestly, probably the most complicated thing I draw is a circle. Most of the time it's rectangles, maybe a few lines, you know, as simple as I can keep it. I will have lots and lots of features, but very few, you know, my sketches are going to be simple. They're going to be simple sketches, lots of features created from them. Another one is not renaming key parameters. And again, I'll point this out. I'll just mention this. You can rename parameters instead of them being D0, D1, D2, D3, D4. We can give them a name. Always give them a name if it's something that you want to flex and change earlier. And this is a real simple one, but not using through for extrusions. And I'll point this out a little bit. Basically, I will build a really bad part, okay? And just to give you some sense of that. And part of the reason that this stands out to me is I did every single one of these things. When I first started working with Inventor, I really used it a whole lot like it was AutoCAD. And I used it a little bit like some mechanical desktop stuff, but I really used it like AutoCAD. And I didn't pay attention to certain things. So I'll start a sketch, and the first thing I want to point out, this is easier to understand than it used to be. In the old days, it just started you out on an XY plane, and you didn't quite see what was going on. It is very clear now, I think, that we've got multiple planes, we've got multiple datums to work from. But I'm going to say I'm going to start drawing on the XY plane. And my gosh, I've got this great 0, 0 point right there in the middle. Realistically, I want to base everything off of this as much as I can. We have center point rectangles. We've got circles that have the center point. Start your lines there. Something has to start at 0, 0. What I've done in the past is I just drew this out in space. I said I need a rectangle, and it's this big by this big. And I'll say 1 inch. We'll make it not too big here, by 1.5 inches. Oh, got to get that right. So I just throw that in, and it doesn't look too bad, I guess, but we'll go ahead and say that sounds good, and it extrudes just fine, right? I can go through and we'll extrude it a 1/2 inch here, just so I get that in, and we'll say, okay, great, we'll extrude it, and I like it. Not too bad. Problem is, look how these planes don't really line up with anything. The back one does, but these others don't. This is an issue. Once you get into, this is such a simple piece, constraining it's going to be no problem. But when I get into an assembly and I start trying to constrain all of these pieces together, having this set up at the center or one of the edges, having those as datums becomes super important to be able to select. I would always suggest that you start off of that 0, 0. So if I do something again, I'll kind of do it similarly. I'll say, yep, I want a sketch. I want it on the XY plane. Instead of having it in that goofy angle like that, I'm just going to say, yep, I want it here. And we'll say 1.5, 1. There it is. Finish that out. Let's extrude it to a 1/2 inch. Now, it all bisects that perfectly. So all those planes are lining up in some way that I can get to them. Basing everything off of that is just such a great way to do it. I'm going to go back to this original piece I had here. And the other thing I'll point out, I'm just going to delete that component that I have. We'll say let's keep the sketch. This is not fully constrained. So my sketch that I created, since I created it off this kind of goofy pattern, is not a fully constrained sketch. I have created something that I would now need to find a way to lock this down. And shame on me, but this is exactly how I did it. I would just start sketching out in space, and I wouldn't care nearly as much. So definitely lock those down. And the other thing that I was kind of warning about is I would be real careful with putting in too much geometry into something like this. So I'm putting in these different fillets. I'm going to come along and maybe we'll put some sort of cut into here. We'll trim this out so we've got this where it needs to be. That looks good. I'm not going to worry too much about dimensions right now. I just want to get this basic shape in here. And I'll add in, let's go do some chamfers in there. And we'll throw that on there. It sounds good. So even as I'm doing this, you can see the complexity of the sketch. Just from the simple one that I'm pulling in, it's starting to get more and more complex. Now, I can take that and I can extrude it just fine the way it goes, and there I've got it. So, man, you know, I put all this work into the sketch, and it's pretty simple to go back and get that. And I've only got one feature. Man, that's great. Here's the problem that I have. If I want to edit one of these fillets that I have difficulty doing that because they're all part of the sketch. They're actually all tied together. If I take a look, there's constraints on here to be equal. So these fit in. So I could come, let's make this 1.375. I could edit this one, which changes this one and, pulls this piece in. But I've got to really give it some thought here. If I build a similar shape to that, but do it over here using features, when I'm putting in features, I can be a little more circumspect with when I'm placing them in. So I'm going to drop this in. I can go back to this feature anytime and edit it. I don't have to edit the underlying sketch that's part of it. I can just edit the feature that I have that's built in underneath that. Okay, just kind of going along with the same idea. And I'll extrude this as a cut. Sounds good to me. And I'll place that in there. And then I'll come along and place in some chamfers. So when I go take a look at this piece, even though I've kind of built the same thing, my original sketch is a rectangle. It is so simple to understand if I want to change my width and height on that. The other pieces have these dialog boxes that are going to drive them because those are other features that I have on there. This is probably the way I'm going to recommend it. When I do training classes, this is what I tell people. Make sure you're keeping it so that it's easily accessible and we can get to that. Now, one other fail, and I did it on purpose here, but I put this pocket, this cutout that I did in there, I did it as a depth. I gave it a distance of a 1/2 inch, which worked because my feature was a 1/2 inch. However, if I edit that feature and just change it ever so slightly, it broke, okay? Always use through. If something's going through, just tell it it's going through, right? So all, is the option we have here. So I'm going to say, yep, that is all. Now, it doesn't matter what that changes to. It always goes all the way through. And it's a simple one, but it's one I see really commonly. And I saw really commonly in myself when I first did it because it's exactly how I did it. Make that cut at 1/2 inch. Always use the all option, so it's going all the way through to get to that. So simple sketches make complex parts. I just use that over and over again. I would much rather see those as features than I would sketches. And again, it's debatable. I get it. Sometimes there's other things we want to do, but generally speaking, that's what I want to do with something like that. And always try to base it off of those 0 planes. I now have something where I can constrain easily to these planes if I'm trying to constrain it. It's all based off of a 0 point. Such a great way to set that up. All right. Design representation techniques. This is, again, this is something that happens a lot, and I just want to explain it a little bit so that we understand what is actually going on here. It's easy to let this happen to you and not quite realize what happened. And what you'll see, there's this box. Again, I was kind of thinking in terms of what are the boxes that show up a lot that people aren't quite sure what they do, and they just kind of click yes or okay, and it seems to work. So you move on. There's a lot of there's little bits and pieces to that, but this is definitely one of them. So what happens? This box appears when a file has been suppressed. So if you're in an assembly and you suppress a file and you hit save, it requires that a named design representation is created. If you do that same step multiple times, you will create multiple design reps. So you're going to have those multiple design reps as part of this when we go through. Again, I'm just going to jump back because this is so much easier to just kind of show this. And I've got an assembly. And I've got an assembly. Somewhere I do. I'll get rid of this drawing. Okay, perfect. Here's my assembly. And I'll point out that there's these levels of detail. These are all design representations. They're all under representations. What's going to happen is I'm at the master level of detail. And now that I've got that, I'll go through. I'm going to pick a component. Let's pick this back cover, let's say. And I'm going to suppress it. So at a glance, what happened is I turned it off. I suppressed that component. I turned it off. So it doesn't appear to do anything different than if I picked that back cover and unchecked visibility. If I uncheck visibility and I hit save, oh my goodness, what is this? Level of detail representation. Something has changed. Oh, it's fine. So what is happening is as I go through and I'm creating this information, I now have, I've got a level of detail that's going to be created for that. Once I suppress a component, I'm actually just going to reopen this thing so that we can get it here so that, so that I'm not fighting it a little bit. Let me get back to my workspace. There we go. That's fine. Awesome. And then I'm going to say, okay, that's great. Let's suppress it. Suppressing it removes it from memory, and it's going to require a new level of detail. So it creates a new level of detail 1. And I say, okay, cool, that's turned off. I can turn it back on, so I'll unsuppress it. Ultimately, I'm going back to my master level. Well, when I go back to master, it said, yeah, I've got some unsaved changes. And I say, oh, okay, that's fine. Just go back to master. Hey, I want to suppress that thing again. So I'm going to go ahead and later on, I'm just kind of doing the same thing. And I suppress that particular component. Make sure I'm in the right spot here. And I'll suppress that particular component. So it's even the same component. I'm doing the same thing. And when I hit this, it's going to call it level of detail 2. What is going on? And I say, I guess, sure, level of detail 2. All right, fine. So now I've got a level of detail 1, a level of detail 2. They don't really, you know, trying to figure out what's going on. I'm not saving any changes. This gets frustrating quick. Well, what this comes down to is every time I suppress a component, it wants to save a level of detail. It's going to go through and save a new level of detail. That's just how suppress works. Suppress is amazing because it removes components from my view and also removes components from my memory. So it will actually take it out of the memory so that I'm not going to be fighting that particular file. Away from these tutorials here. So I'm not going to be fighting that particular file. It's a great way to do it. The problem that we have is that when we're working with that particular file, and I'm going to say it's fine to open this up, I want to be able to switch between these different levels of detail. And I keep creating, before I switch between, every time I save, I'm creating a new level of detail. Even if it's the same part I'm suppressing. Every time I suppress a part, it wants to create a level of detail. I've seen assembly files that have 15 levels of detail, and they literally are level of detail 1 through 15. There's nothing interesting about them. Someone just, at one point, sometimes just to view something, had suppressed a file. So how do you get around it? Well, you can create a level of detail. Nothing's happened yet, but I can create a level of detail, and I can name it, you know, I'll just call it parts suppressed. Or custom, or whatever we want to call it. Now, as I remove these components, I need to do it over here. Now, as I suppress these components and go through and take some of this information, I'm not going to be fighting that. It's not something that I'm going to be too concerned with, because as I go through, I can suppress, unsuppress, you know, whatever I need to do with that, and it's going to save it to this named level of detail I created. Anytime you suppress, you're doing a level of detail. So face facts, that's happening. So you might as well just create one that you can go to. Master is always going to be there, but you can't save to master. You have to create one to save to. So your best bet is to create one and save to it. So solution, you're definitely saving it. Give it a name that makes sense, and then just reuse the same one. If you want to go turn some pieces off and make some adjustments, go to that design, that level of detail design rep, move to that one, and that's where you make your adjustments. It's going to be right there. The problem people get into is they don't realize that by suppressing a file, it's actually creating that level of detail. By the way, when you do create a level of detail and you save it, whatever it suppress removes files from memory. So you could create a level of detail with suppress that just has a few files in it, just the ones that we need to put into the main assembly. So instead of seeing every nut, every bolt, every screw, we've got a level of detail that gives us just what we need to see and makes that file much smaller, makes everything load much faster. That is definitely something to look at. So it's not bad when that design rep thing shows up. It just means you suppressed something and you're on the master one. If you're on one of the others, you can save to it. Well, I guess one of the other non-stock ones, one you created. So I would really suggest, taking a look at that and using that information. The level of detail is absolutely powerful. Okay. Sharing files outside the firewall. This isn't one I have done nearly as much. This is one that happens to me a lot. And the resolve link dialog box that I've got up here, this could be true for lots of things. There's all kinds of reasons why this dialog box might show up. It could be a renamed file. It could be a file that got moved. And I'm going to hit on projects here in just a minute because projects, it gets pretty important, right? We'll see a lot with projects and that type of information. For projects, we see lots and lots of different, different things come up with the project files. And it seems like we're always trying to figure something out with that. But what I want to point out for right now is just the idea of working with sending files to someone else. And if you are familiar with this, this is going to be like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But I've got quite a few customers that, quite a few people that are not familiar with this and what I'm talking about. So the first thing that I would say when we're sharing things outside the firewall, and this is probably the simplest version of this, is that what we don't want to do is just send the assembly. And this happens to me all the time. Someone will say, hey, I'm having problems with a particular file, working with something, whatever it would be. And what they're really doing is I say, okay, great, send that over to me. And they say, okay, no problem, I'll send you the file. And they send it, and I get an assembly. And I'm like, okay, this is not what I need. I need all the files. The assembly is just going to be a link to other files. This is also true of drawings. When you take a drawing and send it to someone, the drawing is just a link to other files. All the files have to be collected and sent, and Content Center has to be included. So if you've got Content Center things in there, that's going to be part of it. We can't do this where we just send the assembly. And I've gone back and forth. I said, oh, that's not it. I need the files. Oh, we're still missing Content Center stuff. Okay, it looks like you've got a library somewhere. That is so difficult to keep someone, for someone to be aware of how that goes, for you personally or some administrator to know which files are in there, where they're pulling from, and all of that information goes together. That's difficult. So there is a tool we can use called Pack and Go. And Pack and Go is going to go through, collect all of the files into a single location. This can be used with or without Vault. So Vault has a version of Pack and Go, but we also have versions of Pack and Go where we're not using that, where we're just going through and maybe we're setting it up. There's a couple different ways we can go through and set that up. We can just grab the files and bring them in. All of that's possible. So Pack and Go is probably the easiest, simplest version that I can tell you. There's a lot of different ways that you can do this. One of them would be within Vault, we can share to a cloud drive and they could pull it down from a cloud drive. You can upload files directly to the cloud is another way of setting that up. So there's a couple of options you can get to for that to work. But Pack and Go is probably the most common and probably one of the least understood, I guess, of the different available items that we have in there, because people tend to get to it and they don't quite understand what's going on with Pack and Go and how the different pieces go together. I'm just going to suggest to use it. Please explore that one. There's a lot into that, probably more than I'm going to get into today. But I'm going to tell you, if you're sharing files outside, Pack and Go is the way to do it. Pack and Go is a plugin that gets installed into Windows with Inventor. You can just right-click on a set of files and say Pack and Go. It's going to connect all of those files into a single location. That's how I'm going to suggest that you do that. Again, if you've got cloud access, if you've got something like that, you can send it off a couple of different ways. But Pack and Go is really the one we're looking at. Big thing to remember here, don't just send someone an assembly file. It does not have the information they need. They need everything as part of that. All right, and the last one, and this is where everybody runs into something, is incorrect use of project files. Project files are a huge topic. Now, if you're using Vault, this becomes less of a topic, because with Vault, we use a single project file, and it points to a location, and that's where the stuff goes, and now we're done. But if you're not using Vault, and you have multiple project files, this is a big, big issue. And I will say, if you've been using Inventor, and you've got, a design team of 2 or 3 people, 5, 6 people, whatever it would be, and you're still using the default project file, you've already lost. The default project file is, oh, it makes perfect sense. We'll use the default one, and we'll go from there. That does not give us, there's not a whole lot of benefit of using the default project file. It is the only one that one in the tutorial files when shipped with Inventor, that's all that's really part of it. But what we need to do is be able to access the reason for using this project file. So what the project file is, and by the way, this is kind of interesting. I've worked with several different 3D tools, and the project file is kind of unique to Inventor. Not a whole lot of other 3D tools use a project file. There are definite benefits to using this, and it's kind of cool how it works. So I'm going to go here, and what the project file really is and what it controls which folder you're working in, what templates are being used, what style library is being used, and where your content center files are. Each one of those becomes super important because that is how we can go access the information. That's how we can go get the files that we want. That's why templates show up a certain way. That's, the style library that we're using and how we control that. That's all through the project file. So again, I'm going to share my screen and talk about project files here a little bit. And I'm just going to go to my projects. I'm going to create a new one. Now, I really only have 2 options right now, which is creating a new single user project or a new Vault project. So a single user project assumes I'm the one accessing it. I'm the one getting the files. If I am if I have Vault, I can create a Vault project, but I'll go ahead and create a single user project. And it's going to ask for my project name, and I'll call it Caleb Co Project. Sounds good to me. And I'm going to give it a location. So this is the project workspace folder. This is where, this file is actually going, and I'll just go here to my C drive and projects. Well, that sounds good. Okay, and I'll say sounds great. So it's creating this project file in that folder. So I'm going to talk through a few of the options, a few of the things that we can do. First of all, it says use the style library. Do we want it to be read-only or do we want it to be read-write? Well, read-write is important because if I want to be able to push information to the style library, if I've got information in old templates that I want to push to my style library, I need to set that so that I can read and write to the style library. Typically, not everybody can do that, so we would create one project as an administrator that we can do the read-write, and another project as someone else that we can't. These are the material libraries that I'm going to be using. So there's appearance and material. The difference being they're both Autodesk library files. Appearance is going to be color. Material is actually going to be a material. It's going to be what we have in terms of steel, gold, Delrin, whatever it's going to be. I'm going to go, I could also, if I knew the location of a particular library, I could add that one. Now my workspace right here, I'm going to leave this alone for right now. My workspace just says workspace. It's just looking at that main folder that I was at. And I'll point that out because that's where default files are going to be saved, created, and so on and so forth. I'm going to skip a couple here and I want to look at one other thing, this idea of folder options. In every one of these, it's going to say default, 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 default. So templates is just pointing to my C drive for my templates. That's the default location. I probably want to change that. I might have put them out on the network, so everybody's using the same set of templates. Maybe I put them in Vault and I'm downloading them, so we've got the same set of files every single time. That's something I probably want to go change and point to the right location. Design data. So design data is all of the information in terms of whole charts. It's got the whole information. It's got my design data for, it's going to be the library. Basically, this is the style library information. This is what it's looking at. And right now, it's just looking at my C drive. I probably want to have that located on the network or located in the vault, something so that I can go get all of that information in a central location. If you're not using Vault, put it at a central location on the network. If you are using Vault, you could store it in there or put it in a central location on the network. Presets, I'll mention presets. These are really for only holes right now. This is where they're going to be stored. This might be okay because typically the presets are per user. That's fine. We can store them there or we can put them in a central location. Content Center files is super important because now if I pull something from Content Center, it's going to dump it to my C drive. And if everybody's using the same thing, then our content centers will never match up, and that becomes an issue. So typically, the folder options are going to be a shared network location. We do not want to leave these as default. We want to point to the right area. So we're pointing to the workspace I have, we're pointing to these we would update these to point to the correct areas. I'm going to save the changes, which I haven't really made a whole lot. The idea would be, right now, if I go to save a file, because of the project I'm using, it dumps it into C projects. That's exactly where it's going to go. So it's going to create this, it's always going to look for that location. That's always where the information is going to be. If you're using default, you have to choose where you're going to save information. A project is a cone of influence. Basically, it looks at the top level through all the subfolders and it says, look here for these files. And that's how Inventor knows how to resolve files and how to find the information. Projects are a big topic, and I'm just kind of hitting on them, but the big thing is don't use default. I've seen it a lot where people are still using the default one. Create a company-specific project file. Let it control the standards as much as you can. Everybody looks here for this, they look there for the templates, they look at this location for the other. I would be cautious with libraries. A lot of people right off the bat want to grab and set up multiple libraries. I would be cautious with that, particularly when it comes to iParts and iAssemblies. That can get real ugly. Libraries limit how you can access them and edit them, so be cautious is what I'd say. I tend to not use many libraries. Content Center, if it's a standard part we're using over and over again, put it into Content Center. It's fairly simple to set up, and it's a great way to continue to use Content Center. And speaking of Content Center, make sure you get a central location for those files. We want to have a central location where we can store those files. So, looking at all these different things, and these are ones that I know I have run into, I know I've personally done, and in some cases when I go to clients, I just see it over and over again. These are the things that stand out. And so IMAGINiT, one thing that we've done, and we've been working, I mentioned I've got 19 years, I don't know if I mentioned 19 years, but I've been with the company for 19 years now. So much of that experience working on these different tools. And we've got a whole lot of other people who have had similar levels of experience and have seen a lot of the same things. So one thing that we've started offering, because these types of things are so common, is an Inventor health check. And the idea of a health check is we want to look at your Inventor environment and just optimize it. Are the projects set up right? Are these things in place? And what this is designed for, we probably wouldn't do this. If you said, hey, I am brand new to Inventor, we haven't even bought it yet. We want to put it in place. Let's get one of those health checks. This is really for clients who've been using Inventor for a while, but it's been a little bit since the first implementation. I started using Inventor with Inventor 2008, and the templates we've got some issues with the templates, and we're not sure about this. If you've done your own Inventor implementation and just want someone to say, yep, that is set up correctly, or there's some adjustments we could make, that's what this is really about. And the idea is this is something where we go on site, sit down with you and your team, talk about different pain points, things you're running into, looking at the product models themselves. So that's where I drew some of this from. These are some of the types of things we would look for. We would go through and say, okay, what do we have in terms of, are we using sketches right? Are we getting into where the constraints are all off? What's going on here? But being able to review those different methodologies, look at the models, and then we would usually spend some time off-site conducting, reviewing the issues, taking a look at that, and then figuring out some recommendations for next steps. And we would really come back to you with a report and have a review meeting saying, you know what, these areas are looking good, these areas are some concern, this is something you really should change. These are to give you an idea of some of the topics that we look at. It's so many common things that we run into, and you actually notice a lot of the issues I was talking about are scattered through here. Project files, levels of detail, sketches, how complicated are the sketches that we get into. All of those different types of things are kind of scattered through here because these are areas that everybody gets into and everybody ends up having questions with. What we usually do is come back, like I said, and say, look, these are some areas that are great, these are some areas we might want to consider looking at, and here's something that is negatively affecting, that this needs to be fixed. So we tend to code it just red, yellow, and green, kind of along the stoplight, giving us an idea where we're at. So an Inventor health check is something that we can, if you want to talk to your sales rep, we can get some of that squared away. We've got just a few questions before we even get started to make sure we're pointing in the right direction. Just things looking at how big is your company, how long you've been using Inventor, what version are you on now, those kinds of things. But we can get something like that set up for you and your team, and we'd absolutely love to do it. And Cassie, as I've been going along, I've seen an awful lot of questions roll in here as we've been going through. So let's see if we can answer a few of those before we end out today.